Well, this is the second time we have a massive character death in a row. Whoever that guy is, really great performance this season. But this is a true podcast, and we're recapping Fargo Season 4, Episode 6, entitled Camp Elegance, which, around Halloween time is kind of a perfect name for something. You've been watching Friday the 13th, Dan?
You know I have. You know I've been watching all sorts of Halloween stuff.
All right, let's just get into this recap. Nothing insane like last week, I will say, but also definitely some insane stuff. I'm just realizing this episode was really solid. The opening scene is Ethel getting off at her little bus stop. It's revealed that it's still the same day as last episode. Everyone just had a tough day last week. This episode is definitely like repercussions of all of their shitty days. Big, horrible, bad, no good, very bad day for Fargo. Seemed to be episode 5. And then there's like a sad rendition of Happy Birthday. And you know who's at the party. It's Zombie Man. He's just hanging out at the party.
Zombie Man is back.
Zombie Man's back. And that's all we see of Ethelreda and Zombie Man. Boy, was it spooky. We're on Zombie Watch now because there's Zombie Man and maybe more zombie people.
I mean, I thought the same thing. At first, I thought that there was going to be like multiple zombie people in the background, and I was thinking, that's going to be Ethelreda's storyline this season is her fight with the zombie people, and Orietta comes in or something. This opening was really weird for me. I really like this episode. This is maybe one of my favorite episodes of the season so far, but this opening, again, they're going down this road with Ethelreda's stories. They're turning it into like a horror film, and I don't know why. And in the context of what happens in the later parts of this episode, I feel like this opening scene has no business being there. Because the rest of it is, it's like the Miller's Crossing thing that they've been interested in all season. So this opening, I actually would have preferred the omission of Ethelreda and Thurman and Debril, as opposed to having like this weird out-of-place Zombie Man moment. Hey, I'm not complaining about getting Zombie Man, because I love me some Zombie Man. We've been on the record about Zombie Man.
We love Zombie Man here.
This is a pro Zombie Man podcast.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Dan. I think the best moments of this episode was the build-up to everything we had been talking about previously with the mafia. This opening definitely doesn't feel like the rest of the episode. When I started rewatching the episode, it is weird to think that, oh yeah, this episode opens with Ethel. Sometimes it doesn't really fit, and I definitely think this week it didn't exactly fit. And just a fun reminder, Zombie Man is here, and he will play an important part. This is the third time we're seeing him, which, I feel like rules of 3, the third time should be really important. And I feel like this time wasn't.
And we did have an over-under on how many times we would see Zombie Man going forward this season. I think we were saying 2. I hope that next time is more substantial. I thought he was going to be a throwaway thing the first time he showed up, but now he's here to stay, for good or bad. I don't know what that means going forward.
He's contractually obligated to be in 4 episodes, is what I'm reading.
Right. Very difficult on set.
It really stayed in character the whole time. No one actually knows his name. He does not get credited in this season. Then we get into the actual meat and potatoes of the episode. I think this should have been the opening. It would have been kind of wonderful. So Otis is at home. He's doing all his classic OCD stuff. And he's such like a good cop / just like noir detective that he like knows someone's in his shower, and then this man jumps on him, who is later revealed to be one of the cannons and a boxer. He is competing with Gaetano for craziest eyes this season, because it looks like he's about to murder Otis in cold blood, and his eyes are bulging out of his head. Loy comes in, is probably the biggest character in this episode. He is going off the rails a bit. He's talking to Otis. Loy loves to monologue this episode. It's a classic Fargo trope. But he had an interesting line about slavery. He says, fighting 400 years of history, and like he compares it to a mindset, which is literally the Kanye West quote about how 400 years, that sounds like a choice. And I thought that was just interesting that Noah Hawley chose to comment on Kanye West in this season. More interestingly, Loy talks about how Otis's dolls, which we kind of were like, that's a little much. They come back and he compares the dolls in Otis's house to Black Americans, and how if the dolls came to life and like overtook just like his habitat, he would hate them and want to murder them. And it's like, that's how white America in the 1950s feels about the Black American. And like we saw in the trailer, Loy is going to get Otis to work for him.
There's a lot that happens in this little section. First of all, him undoing his fly multiple times with his OCD and then turning, realizing someone's in the shower, and then someone jumps through the shower curtain. That's a great Fargo moment. Someone asked David Lynch once like what it is to be Lynchian, and he had no idea what that meant. He can't comment on that really. People have been talking for a long time about what it means to be Lynchian, and Lynchian and Fargo are kind of similar to me. They're both like Americana, but it's like a soiled Americana. Like somebody gets shot in the head while they're drinking a carton of milk, and the milk and the blood mix together. That's like what like a lot of Lynch movies are, and that's what a lot of Fargo is. And so this guy jumping through the shower curtain onto Otis is like a classic Fargo moment in that same kind of way. I love a good analogy. Any number of things. That's great. That's a good analogy. But at the end of the day, they're still the monster.
That's a great point.
Like they actually are the monster. It's not that they're like not the monster. And the same thing with this analogy. It's like they're not real people. And that's what you're saying about these dolls. The comparison it's not a total one-to-one working analogy. So the whole time I was just like, what are you talking about, Loy?
I mean, I kind of understood it in like, as it's like, this is your property, and like, this is how like just slave owners felt in general.
Look at it from the other side. If you're comparing the slaves to the dolls, they can't be compared really, just because it kind of, I don't know, it just sort of delegitimizes and dehumanizes the slaves in a little bit of a way. It was just sort of something that made me kind of giggle to myself, because I was like, this is a bad analogy.
Continuing from this scene, it pans from Otis's apartment and plays the Fargo theme in a very different way. They use like different instruments. It's a lot of fun. And then they go all the way over, and it's Deafy watching Otis still. I think I want to say it's like the second episode, maybe in a row. Deafy is just watching the opening scene from afar, and we'll see where that goes. But also, he is the Fargo title again. And I think he's the only character this season who's been in the Fargo title twice. It makes me think that Deafy's still going to be a big character.
Yeah, it makes me think about just the way that he was introduced into the story. I kind of wish that we didn't know who he was yet, because everything that he's done so far as a character is just watching. And I would actually rather not know who he is, since he's playing a watcher. I would rather just be like, who is that guy and why is he watching? As opposed to being like, when is he going to stop watching? Because I do want him to start taking action at some point. He is really interesting, but you do have to sideline some of the characters week to week just because of how much they're trying to cram into one season. They kind of did that with Deafy last week, and they're doing it with Deafy again this week. I'm expecting a big Deafy episode next week.
I mean, he had his moments last week with that Ethel scene and almost getting Zelmar and Swanee.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like I don't know him well enough, and it's like 6 episodes in. Probably one of the most exciting scenes and surprising scenes comes next, and I entitled it Gaetano being weird.
I did too.
Okay,
that's cool, what I have in my notes. I said Gaetano is crazy and weird.
He's stabbing like a mannequin, and we talked about like hats on hats, and it's just like, okay, now he's just like in a wife beater and like classic Italian Mario man just stabbing just anything. And then Zelmar and Swanee come in, which I was like, yes, I like can't wait to see Zelmar, Swanee, and Gaetano interact, because that's going to be very exciting. They're like such crazy characters, and to have them all in a room like debating on something is going to be the most epic thing ever, which we didn't see. There's a fight that you don't see, which kind of harkens back to Lauren Malvo's fight against the Fargo Syndicate in season 1. They had some beautiful stuff with showing just like the ventilation like going off. And this is the first time I think maybe in the entire season you see Gaetano genuinely scared. He is afraid of what's like behind the door, and it is kind of nice, and it adds a lot to his character. There's a couple great Fargo moments in this, I think. He sees the doorknob turn and he immediately shoots, just like his like friend Paulo, and he's like so sad. He's like, he has like 50 shots in him and he's just so sad. And you know, it's that ironic breaking of tension that Fargo does so well. Swanee sneaks in behind him. Zelmar comes down the hall, and then you're kind of thinking like, oh shit, is he just gonna move and they're gonna shoot each other or something? Swanee is just a badass and shoots him in the back of the head. And I thought Gaetano was dead. I legitimately thought he was dead. In my notes it still says Gaetano dead. I think would be classic Fargo, you know?
Yeah.
But alas, Swanee has a throwaway line where she says, he's still breathing. Drag his body away, but with a rug instead, because he is far too heavy. An awesome scene that built tension very well, but unfortunately we didn't get that fun scene with Zelmar, Swanee, and Gaetano.
We still could, though, in the future. If Gaetano gets out, if he escapes, because there was that analogy earlier in the season when they were talking about Gaetano being like a lion in the wilderness versus being a lion in the cage. And right now they got him caged up. And if he gets out, he's going to be a bull in a china shop. He is a big guy. It wasn't until this scene when you really get the gravity of it, how heavy and how large of a man he is, because they can't carry him. And so they have to do the greatest, funniest thing this season by carrying him out on a carpet. It was really surprising, actually, this scene, because it was something that you expected to be a bigger like setup, I guess. It was a big deal that the Cannons were going to have these two cons in their pocket. So I was expecting like a full episode of setup, like, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to the compound, you're going to do this, you're going to be dressed as this, and you're going to act like this, and there's going to be a scene where they had to go get the clothes, and it was just going to be like a full episode thing. But no, instead, they just jump right into it early into the episode, and we get all the action off screen. What we do get to see, which is great, is Gaetano actually having real emotions. He was kind of bumbling around with the bullets at one point. It was just nice to see him not be totally insane, especially because he starts the episode off being totally insane, stabbing a mannequin.
Yeah, I mean, all that was missing in the scene was just him dancing. Cool. Yeah, and then immediately, which is kind of nice, Gaetano is in captivity now. Loy's got him. Huge move for Loy after last week's episode. And I don't know. I don't have much to say. Loy just like goes on talking. And then Crazy Eyes from earlier in the episode gets a little backstory. He's a boxer. They're just going to beat up Gaetano, like, for the time being. Like you said, like the metaphor they were using with him, like a lion in a cage, like he is actually in a cage now. Yeah, Loy really doesn't care anymore. He's just upset about Dr. Senator dying.
It's becoming a little bit trying at this point, the amount of monologuing that Loy is doing, because he's talking a lot, but we're not really learning that much about him. You know, I think Chris Rock is doing his best. I didn't think last week was a really great Chris Rock performance episode, and unfortunately, because it was also the episode where he had the most to do. And then I think this week also he had quite a bit to do, but you know, he was up and down.
Yeah, I find his performance somewhat stale.
I agree, yeah.
I was thinking about it with his first monologue. It's like, yeah, he's reading the words and he's doing well, but it's like, I feel like there's beats he could definitely like take throughout. And like, as someone who's not nearly as great of a director as like anyone who's directing these episodes, it is really interesting to be like, to think like maybe Chris Rock just doesn't have that far of range. Like he's charming and he has a lot to add to Loy. Like even last week we talked about like that look he gives at the end is easily the best thing he's done this season. And it's like a little over the top, but it's like you can see the emotion there. And I feel like when he's talking sometimes it just gets lost in his performance, if that makes sense.
I hate to say it, but you kind of at this point start to wonder, like, what would the season look like if they hadn't cast Chris Rock, but instead just throwing out names? What if even Glenn Turman was playing Loy Cannon? Eats up every scene that he's in, and I don't know. I started thinking about that last week. And then later in this episode, when we get the flashback with Dr. Senator, I was thinking, it's nice to have him back. And I kind of wish she was Loy. Also, before the season started, I was a little bit unsure about Chris Rock being the lead. And the first thing I thought of also was like, did they try to get Dave Chappelle first? Because I think Dave Chappelle could have done some interesting things. It's unfair to compare them just because they're stand-up comics. But I think at this point, I'm kind of out on Rock's performance. I think he's fine. It's nothing special at this point.
But yeah, it is kind of a bummer because like 3 years ago when we heard about how season 4 is starting, the first name out was Chris Rock. And we were like, yes, that's awesome. And same with Jason Schwartzman. It's like presence-wise, like everyone knows who Chris Rock is. Like most like Wes Anderson heads know who like Jason Schwartzman is. And it is kind of disappointing so far.
Let's just rip the Band-Aid off now, I think, because I've been like holding my tongue just to say anything bad about Chris Rock and Jason Schwartzman. But honestly, I think at this point, I'm just going to say that I think that they're both miscast.
Totally.
I'm not falling in love with either of them at this point. And I do think that Schwartzman actually has some really good stuff in this episode. We finally hit the point where he starts to get more serious as a character. But even though he's still being played a little bit more seriously, I just at no point do I buy Schwartzman. I don't really buy Rock as canon either. And I feel horrible for saying that. I feel guilty about it because I love Fargo and I love these actors so much.
And it is just difficult, I think, when, especially this season, you have like such good character actors like Jack Houston. Like his Otis is so, like, it's so well thought out. Rabbi Milligan, like fucking Ben Whishaw is so good. It is just, even that random guy is pretty good. I think it just comes down to like, there's not a full mesh with the actors and their characters. There's a little too much of the actor.
Yeah.
Like Jason Schwartzman is a little too detached and Chris Rock's a little dry.
Yeah.
But again, I think they're very interesting characters and I'm excited to see where they're going. I wouldn't be upset if they're not nominated like for things come award season. Yeah. I'd understand if they're not nominated, is what I should rephrase that to. I'm glad we ripped off that Band-Aid and still a lot to talk about this episode. Also, this nice, fun little scene, Orietta is back in a nice little scene between her and Harvard. And we've got to say, we've been Harvard simps for a long time.
Big time.
Yeah, and he is a delight to watch in these scenes. Orietta has a fun reminder, which we've been predicting this for a while. She says, I haven't forgotten about the macaroon. And it's definitely Noah Hawley being like, it's coming, don't worry.
Yeah.
And then, shockingly, I thought this is moving the story pretty fast. Ethelrita's letter is already there. And Orietta's trying to basically figure out who duped her out. And there's a moment where she's just fucking staring at the letter. And she's, like, harnessing, like, the devil watch. We're still on devil watch, but like she's basically just harnessing the power of the devil, like to figure out who wrote that letter. And then Harvard's about to like turn her in, and then she like convinces him otherwise. She's just like, it's just like fake news and all this stuff. And Harvard just goes, "You've convinced me. I'm convinced." Like it's another great evil. He has these great evil man lines, and he always hits them out of the park. But the biggest thing at the end, he goes, "No more funerals. You don't get to go to the funerals of people that have died on your watch." I've missed Orietta. She was sidelined last week, so it was good to have her in this scene, and this was her biggest scene in the episode.
Yeah, she was good, and so was Harvard. Everything that Harvard says is really funny. He's also a character that, like, all season long, I'm thinking to myself, like, if this was set in Minnesota, does this character still work? Or, like, could that character still be sort of the same? And Harvard kind of can. He wouldn't have that accent, but he does that, like, I'm convinced, you got me, it's all good. And I thought that was, like, a really Fargo-y kind of moment. It was a bit of a stale scene until it started to get really tense towards the end, just because we've already had this moment before with Orietta convincing the head of the hospital that she hasn't done anything wrong. But of course, it's better this time because it's Harvard.
Right, exactly. And I feel like it is weird because I feel like we kind of are coasting with a few characters. Like it seems like we already know everything we need to know. So like the next thing that's going to happen is just the big thing for them, which is kind of interesting, but it also makes the season feel kind of hollow in some ways, which I'm loving this season, but like there are just like some holes in it. And I feel like once like Orietta has her big thing, Ethel has her big thing, like it'll feel a little hollow simply because we learned everything we need to know about them like five hours ago, you know? It's just really interesting because in season 1, I feel like Lorne Malvo always had something to do. He was always doing something. And it is just kind of disappointing that these great characters are kind of reserved right now because it's just going to build to the big thing.
What you're talking about kind of brings me back to, and I do have, based on what you were just saying, I do have a wild prediction with Zombie Man and with Devil Watch, combining the two into one. But what you're saying actually brings me back to my point about Deafy and how I kind of wish we hadn't learned who he was yet. I wish we had waited longer for him to be introduced. I think that one of the problems this season is we introduced all of the characters right up front, which makes sense. That's usually what you do in a TV show. Imagine if we met Key and Peele's characters, like in episode 3. Like, they have nothing to do until the end of the season, so why would you bring them in so early? So I feel like Orietta could have actually been waited on. Plotline could be moved forward a little bit. Obviously, it's a little bit complicated because she also is connected to Ethelrita, and Ethelrita has to have something to do for the first few episodes. I'm just sitting here like 2 weeks in a row, we don't get much Orietta. That's the same with Deafy. This week, we don't get much with him. Yeah, and it just makes me wonder, you know, why did we introduce all these people so early?
Don't have a point yet, so why introduce them? But yeah, moving right along, Josto is in the classic like bar set that was like at the beginning of the history lesson this season, which made me think like, oh my god, like is Josto just about to get whacked? Like, is he about to die? But instead, New York comes, and we did not see this coming. Joe Bulo, who is played by Brad Garrett in season 2, but he appears, and it's just kind of like a nice little nod. There's not much there. Mort Kellerman came in, Joe Bulo is now in, and it is New York. Like we were talking about earlier, so I think we're going to be right about them taking over. But then there's a nice scene with Ebel and Josto, and honestly, like this kind of felt nonchalant to me. Gaetano is captured, and Dr. Senator is dead. Some characters figure these things out, and it should be like these big revelations, but like Ebel's like, wait, the doctor's dead? And then Josto's like, yeah, I know that already. Oh, that's weird. Like, I feel like Josto would be more mad about that because he didn't put out that hit. That was Gaetano. And it lines up perfectly that Josto doesn't give a fuck that Gaetano's captured. But the big caveat here for Josto's character is that New York wants them to make up. So Josto's going to have to at least try a little, but it was shot nicely, and more time for Ebel's pretty good too. I like Ebel this season.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think he's been really, really solid in the limited time that he's had. This was, I think, a good moment for sort of chuckle humor where Josto is just like, okay, yeah, but tell me about New York. Every time like Gaetano's brought up. So I like that.
Loy and Dr. Senator have a little flashback, and the point of the flashback is basically saying you can't get Satchel back without starting a war. This is Loy's next big move after getting Gaetano, who is very beat up in this scene. But yeah, Loy is basically just like, Otis, you're gonna get Satchel, and that's what's gonna happen. Otis is of course a nervous wreck.
It's just nice to see Doc Senator, yeah.
Always great to see. We said it last week. He steals the flashback, really. Warm. I felt warm seeing him again. But anyways, Otis directly goes to the Fadas after that. It's super tense. He's nervous. You're kind of feeling his OCD a little bit. Like, it keeps cutting back from like Satchel to him to Satchel to him to like his gun. Like, it's very intense. And then Calamita comes out of nowhere and he just scares the shit out of Otis because he's like, you're a dead man or something. He's like, I'm just joking. That's how we joke around here. And I thought Calamita might know that Otis ratted on them because I think Calamita just is already ready for war. He's just like, it's a war already, so we got to get going. Otis is literally getting pulled at all angles. We'll see what happens with that.
I was a little hard on Otis last episode, just because my big gripe has been just that they're playing him for comedy so much more than I would like. Early on, one of my big predictions was that Rabbi Milligan was going to be sort of the Hansi character, the character that flipped sides in this war between these two groups. And I'm a little disappointed that that's not quite exactly I mean, he is, but it's not exactly what I wanted was for him to be doing what Otis is doing, basically, for him to be the connector piece between the canons and the fadas. But the way that they actually handled Otis being that character, I'm actually kind of enjoying. It is played more for comedy, but it actually like made me laugh a lot this episode.
Jack Houston, great. And then there's like a Josto Ebel argument, and Otis is in this scene as well. And there's a lot of like Italian going back and forth, which I really love in media. I think Inglourious Bastards is so good because like there's literally like 3 parts the movie dedicated to like different languages and like very realistic. Like this is how Italians would talk to each other. Jason Schwartzman has a great line where he goes like speak American, which is not a language for you listeners out there. And then he kind of gets into it, like he asks Calamita like whose side is he on, and this is what you were talking about earlier, like this is the big Josto scene. He's really kind of like playing his cards now, like how Loy has been the whole time. Basically, he's like, get Milligan here, to this random ass guy. He's like, get Milligan here, take Satchel for a drive, which we all know in mafia movies that means like take him out to the woods and shoot him in the back. The old it's the classic bring Rachel Keller out to the woods, shoot her in the chest type thing. It's kind of shocking that Josto like chooses to do this. It is really fully into war now, and Josto with doing that stuff is only going to make it worse. And he's doing it to this just poor guy that like we don't know. And it's a great performance from like who is that guy, but like I have no clue who he is, and I'm sure he's in an earlier episode. The scene like ends kind of with a Loy and Josto split screen, and I thought that was really beautiful because they're going through hard times right now. And like we say earlier, it's like if they just talk things out and like agreed to be like cool together, like they could like come together against the actual oppressive forces that bring both of their communities down.
I felt guilty for a second because I was like, oh, I'm a bad podcaster. I'm a bad Fargo viewer because I have no idea who this guy is on the screen that they just called in. Like I didn't hear the name when Josto said bring him in, so I was like who, and then he showed up and I was like who. Guess no one knew who he was, but yeah, he was really good in this episode. We'll talk about him more. That whole sequence was good for me. Josto actually had an opportunity to really be serious and be taken seriously by the characters in the scene. Also, I do at this point kind of wonder why has Josto not just killed Calamita, because it's so clear that Calamita is not on his team. Every opportunity Calamita gets, he's choosing Gaetano. I know that they do though mention that Calamita says he's known him since he was a baby, and that was a good thing to throw out there because I had forgotten that. Without having been reminded of that, I would just keep saying like why don't you just why don't you just kill this guy? Yeah, just one more thing with Otis in that scene. It was just funny. It was just funny that the canons pick him up early in the episode and they tell him to do one thing, and then the fadas pick him up later in the episode and they tell him to do the exact opposite thing. It was just kind of funny. I actually really enjoyed Otis in this episode.
Yeah, no, that was a good point that I missed. It was he's literally being tugged in just opposite directions. Okay, and then some nice Rabbi Milligan stuff. We'll talk about it like more very soon. Milligan and whoever that guy is have a nice scene. That's all I'm gonna say because like that's where we are in this podcast. He basically is like, all right, Milligan, go see Josto. And then Rabbi like wants to take Satchel with him, but then he's like, no, just you. And then Milligan has that classic line he's been saying is like, if I'm not back, I'm dead or in jail. But this time it's nice because Satchel finishes the sentence. I think just like as a screenwriter, it's like an easy trick to show two characters like have like a deep bond is like if one character keeps saying the same thing and eventually the other character finishes it, it's like, oh, like they're good friends. It's like such an easy trick to pull. Like,
at this point in the episode, are you thinking that they might kill a kid? The speed in which the episode was moving, I was really in love with. That's why I like this episode so much, is because they actually moved a lot of the plot forward. We did talk about how they're kind of sort of stuck with some characters that are just hanging out for the episode, but the big plot points kind of did get moved, and this with Satchel is one of the bigger plot points. And I was thinking, okay, episode 6, like something really terrible might happen. At that point, I'm thinking it's very possible that Satchel might end up getting shot in the back of the head.
Yeah. I will say I didn't think until the end that I was like, oh, wait, they're going to kill Satchel. Because, like, still in my mind, it's like, oh, it's Mike Milligan. But
totally, yeah.
It could not be Mike Milligan at all, like, still, like, which is kind of fun.
I was preparing myself for this podcast just in case we had to backtrack on the Mike Milligan thing. Like, if Satchel got shot at the end of this episode, I was practicing my monologue for explaining how I want to apologize to everyone about getting this wrong.
I mean, the funny part about us is that we actually predicted both things. So, like, if it is Mike Milligan, it's like, oh, yeah, it's clearly Mike Milligan. But if it's not, we're like, this is, like, Noah Hawley's genius. It's like he pulled the rug from under us. We all thought it was Mike Milligan, but it wasn't, which we also called in, like, an earlier episode. Briefly, totally. Just because, like, this is a recap, so we just got to go through each scene. Orietta has a scene in the hospital, which is the exact same scene as last week, which is why sometimes I feel like maybe she shouldn't be in the episode or, like, introduced later on in the series. But we'll see, you know, who knows. But yeah, it's the exact same scene as last week.
Hitting her head on the thing, I was actually for a moment thinking, is this literally like where we were last week? Like, was everything that we just saw like a flashback and we're now ending up right where we started in the last episode? Obviously, that's not the case. It's also not super interesting to me. The point of her hitting her head against the wall is because she has this one patient that is like really sick and keeps making this noise. She just wants to kill this patient. And you understood that last week. You understand that this week. And I just don't care when all this other really interesting stuff is happening. Her desire to murder her patients is the least of my concerns right now. Just trying to figure out, like, who is Lloyd Cannon and why is Ethel Rita in the season, and like things that are more integral to the plot and to the story and to like the themes of the season. Her desire to murder her patients is like less than interesting at this point. It was like a fun thing early in the season that was going to set up her character, set up some conflicts later on. But at this point, I just don't care.
It was so cool that she was a nurse that killed people and then wasn't a nurse anymore. And it's like, oh, now she's just a nurse again. And I know she'll break out of it. And like,
exactly.
Like Jessie Buckley's like second build this season. So like she's the big, she literally is the scene stealer this season. Like, she's the Lauren Malva. And it is just kind of sad to be like, well, maybe I kind of want to watch the other stuff right now. Go on. There's Milligan and Josto meeting behind the lot. And Josto just says to flat out, he's like, you're back in the game. And then they do a couple flashes to like Milligan and like Satchel. And I'm like, I guess like this is them like making it work. But then the next scene is when I fully buy Milligan and Satchel's relationship, actually. All thanks to Binwith Shaw. Like, he gives a wonderful performance, but he literally rushes into the house, like grabs like whoever that guy is, his wife, and he's like, where is the kid? And then he just shoots some random guy just in the shoulder and like chokes her out. Like, he cares deeply for Satchel, and I think it's sold in this one.
That's why this episode is really great, is because, like I said, they start to move characters and plot points really quickly. And it was nice that he didn't just casually go into the room and say, where is he? I'm going to go get him. No, he really, his actions reveal his character, and he really cares about Satchel. Yeah, when he shoots that guy, I'm like, oh no, so we're moving. Like, we're moving fast. Like, we're on our feet and we're running. And just before he does that also, like when Josto tells him, you're back in the game, beautiful push in on Wishaw, and like these last few minutes with him are just so good. It's unfortunate that the season is so crammed, because in an alternate universe, I just wish the season was about him, because he's so good.
I think that's a crazy part about this season, and why it feels so unbalanced sometimes, is that every character is like that. I actually feel like I'd be down for a full season with Otis.
Yeah, I totally agree.
As a protagonist, it's really crazy. Like, these characters are so well thought out. Really, like, conflicted characters that are very interesting in their own right. It's just like the problem is we don't see enough of them. I think what season one, we constantly talk about this in season one. Season one ignites, like the first episode ignites the rest of the season. Like everything that happens in the first episode has consequences for the 9 other episodes. You know, this season's different. Like the pie is all but gone now, really.
And also, like, what is really cool about this episode is, like, throughout the season, you've talked about how this season is sort of novelistic because it's taking its time and it's showing us different pieces and different characters, and everything feels a little bit disjointed. But what I liked about this episode was, and especially with Shaw just showing up and shooting a dude and then moving his plot along, was like, these are all free agents. Like, they're all individually acting on the things that they care about. While they seemed like totally random, unconnected characters, it's because they kind of are, and they just happen to be crashing into each other right now, which is going to lead to something that's so chaotic and so insane, but is going to be so satisfying if they can pull it off. As Rabbi Milligan has a singular goal that almost doesn't have anything to do with the Fada's goals and with the Canon's goals or with Orietta's goals or with Ethelrita's goals. They are singular to making sure Satchel is safe, and the actions that he then takes cause more problems for all of the other characters just because he's acting on his own self-interest.
The only comparable thing I can have to it might shock you, but I think season 4 of Arrested Development is like the most similar to this season. That season, if you don't know, is like mainly and this is the second week I've talked about Arrested Development on this podcast, but like the whole season focuses on one character and then like accumulates to like one like massive like party that like everyone was at. It is not the television we know. It is definitely different storytelling. And I think that's refreshing. And I think Fargo is always about storytelling.
Yeah, and as I mention every week after I trash something, I really love this season. I'm having a great time watching it. Nothing that I've criticized is preventing me from nothing that I've criticized so far is preventing me from enjoying this season. It's just preventing the show from being incredible art. There's just some missing pieces that is preventing it from reaching its highest peaks.
Definitely. And then whoever that guy is his name, and Satchel going on, a little drive, and then they stop ominously at just like nowhere, which, when you're like 6 or 7 or whatever, it's like, oh, like this doesn't really mean anything. But when you're like any older, you're like, oh, I'm gonna die. And they go through some ruins and stuff, and whoever that guy is just starts giving a monologue, and it's just like, all right, it's Fargo, whatever. But it's actually really good, and it's about him coming to America and like how he feels about America. And it's not like I would say it's more like of an American dream monologue than like anything else. This is when I thought they were gonna kill a kid, and I'm like, wow, we're gonna have to have a whole thing about how he's not Mike Milligan. He's about to do it. Has a bunch of flashes with Satchel and the gun, and then kind of surprisingly, he puts his gun down. He's like, I'm not gonna kill a kid. And then Satchel looks up, notices the gun, bam. Whoever that guy was is now dead.
Truly tragic.
Rest in peace, whoever that guy was. question mark to 1950. And his tombstone just says whoever that guy was. And it's Rabbi Milligan. Honestly, like, typically in things like that, like, I knew Rabbi Milligan was coming to save the day. Like, something I hate that TV show or media just in general does is that a character gets somewhere too fast. With the last few scenes with Milligan, I totally buy it, because he was literally rushing for it.
I also buy it because Milligan is rushing. He's moving at the speed of light, but then whoever that guy was, he is moving at a snail's pace because he really wants to connect with this kid before he decides to kill him and tell him this grand story about being in basically a POW camp and about this American dream. The two colliding makes sense.
And it's weird because the carving also just says whoever that guy was.
Right. I think it's an Italian name. That's why it's foreign to us.
And then, somewhat what we predicted last week, there is a road trip with Milligan and Satchel, and they're going over the road, and they vanish. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're not in the next few episodes. They're gone now. I kind of missed this part. Milligan and Satchel have a really nice conversation. Milligan's like, I don't want you to be a child soldier like I was, like 2 times over. You can choose if you want to go back to your family or you want to stay with me or like you want to do whatever you want, but you're not going to kill people. If this is Mike Milligan, that's even more tragic. So honestly, like I would be happy if Satchel gets out of it fully. As this is Fargo, I wouldn't be surprised if he grows up to be a murderer as well.
I think you talked about earlier how Milligan rushing to the house sort of gave you all the buy-in that you needed to believe in that relationship. And that definitely went a long way for me as well. But then this scene, when he says to Satchel, you're going to have a choice. That's really where I was like, okay, nothing's going to justify the fact that we didn't get more scenes with the two of them before. But at least I buy that Milligan cares deeply about this idea. Regardless of how well he knows Satchel, he just doesn't want him to be him. They had to make a sacrifice because of all the characters. They decided, okay, we're not going to show Satchel and Milligan getting along for 20 minutes like I wanted. Instead, we're going to wait until the big moment of truth to reveal Milligan's really sad thoughts. It does so many things because it tells you a lot about Milligan, gives you the buy-in to believe that Satchel and Milligan have that kind of a relationship.
It comes at the death of probably the biggest character this season, and whoever that guy is.
He was really good though. I thought even though we don't know who he was or what his name was, his monologue was actually really good. There have been so many monologues this season, and a lot of them are really trying, and a lot of them are really the same. I mean, even this one was pretty much the same. Every monologue is about America and like what it means to be an American. This one actually was a little refreshing, and this is good. I don't feel like I'm wasting my time listening to this.
No, definitely not. All jokes aside, really good performance by that guy. I'm just going to be sad when whoever that girl is hears about whoever that guy is. Think they might have been married. Yeah. Family of whoever they are. Last scene, it's a fast scene. We revisit Orietta, and she comes out of the shadows after clearly murdering the old man that she had been angry about. Definitely just got off on murdering him. It's fucking Devil Watch. We all know already.
Yeah, what are we pushing in on before we see the room that she walks out of? It's that winged angel statue at the end of the hallway. So Devil Watch is in full effect. Been dormant.
Sorry, I just want to say, who else comes out of the shadows in this episode? It's Zombie Man.
That's
and
right.
I think a couple recaps ago we said Devil Watch is in full effect because we have the devil confirmed, and it has to be connected. Ethel and like Orietta being so about Ethel at the beginning of the season, like there's something there, and it might not be Devil Watch, but hell, I'm gonna call it Devil Watch.
We're going down with the ship, okay? We're the stringed quartet on the Titanic. Like, we're going down with this Devil Watch thing.
They saw the iceberg early on, and they're like, we're staying.
That's right.
Just about done here. Do you have an aw heck moment of the week, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, when we were watching the episode, we were texting, and I said right when Gaetano got shot in the head, I was like, oh, that's the aw heck moment of the week. But there's also a bunch of others that come later. This episode was jam-packed with aw heck moments, but, just because of the level of surprise and the level of humor, and because, as we talked about, the way that they diffuse tension and the authentic nature of Gaetano's performance, I'm still going to go with that scene. I think that's the aw heck moment of the week, specifically him getting dragged out by these two female cons on a carpet.
An exciting way to open the episode. I think my aw heck moment is going to be a little more serious. I think it's that scene at the end with Milligan and Satchel. It is very complex. It's such a complex relationship, and it's just that idea where it's like, I don't want you to be like me, and I feel like while there's not a lot of that in Fargo, I feel like a lot of characters might feel that way. I hope the best for Milligan and Satchel. That's like an aw heck moment within itself. All right, Dan, so a fast episode. A lot did happen. You said earlier you had a bold prediction. What was that?
Yes, I have a bold prediction that I hope doesn't come true. It's also a silly prediction, but so far this season, nothing's been wasted. Even the dolls, like we were talking about earlier, we thought was just like a throwaway, stupid quirky thing for Otis last week, but instead they come back into play in this week, and it's an analogy. The pie obviously was paid off. Everything with every character is getting paid off. There's nothing that's being wasted. So I don't think it is coincidence that Zombie Man and the devil in the form of Orietta Mayflower are both converging on Ethelrita. I definitely think that something's going to happen there. If I'm going to go ahead and be silly for a second, I think that Orietta as the devil and Zombie Man are going to have a fight. Not a literal physical fist fight, but I think one of the two has to expel the energy of the other. The point here is Ethelrita and her family, the Smutneys, have been cursed. I think they haven't done a great job of re-explaining this and making sure that it's like a tight thread throughout the season, but it's really an interesting thread that kind of was just thrown out in an earlier episode. But the Smutney family is cursed, and I think that whatever happens between Ethelrita and Orietta is going to culminate in the curse being lifted. Whether that means that the spirit of the devil and Zombie Man have to have a spiritual fight like in Insidious, I don't know.
And then create Lauren Malvo.
Right, it's like Twin Peaks The Return. Like these two entities come together and they create like an egg, and the egg hatches and it's Lauren Malvo. But yeah, I'm being silly a little bit, but I mean, the point of bringing it up is really just like it's not coincidental that there is a zombie man and a curse on the Smutney family, and then across the street is this character that has, as much as we're kind of being silly with Devil Watch, like she's definitely has this like religious and spiritual thing going on with her.
The episode starts with Zombie Man and ends with Orietta.
That's right, yeah. I didn't mention this before, but it was perplexing that they bookend the episode with this weird scene when they could have ended it with Milligan.
Like it's definitely purposeful. Like nothing is by mistake in something like this big budgeted. But yeah, I mean, besides that, like I don't think there's much to say this week. A lot of stuff to wrap up. And I think we kind of saw one with Milligan and Satchel. Like I don't really think we're gonna see too much more of them.
Do you think they show up in like episode 9, like Wrench and Swanko?
I mean, oh my god, I absolutely love Wrench and Swanko. I think they were such an iconic duo. I mean, I do think they come back, but it's hard to say in what form. I imagine it's going to be something connected with all the characters, obviously.
Yeah, I've got 2 thoughts just before we go. I want to talk a little bit about Gaetano, because I think that's the one wrench in the predictions that we didn't foresee. We expected it to be Gaetano versus Josto for pretty much the majority of the season until one of the other kill each other. But now Gaetano is taken kind of completely out of the equation because he's literally caged up like an animal. So I think what happens with him could be very exciting. If he gets out, then he's going to kill Josto, and he's going to just unleash holy hell on everybody. And then I've just got one more before we go. Again, sort of a silly one, but do you think we see Dr. Senator in every episode for the rest of the season?
Yeah, no, this episode especially was really like Angel on his shoulder, like, don't try to get Satchel back or evil will happen, like type stuff. And it's like, well, I want Satchel back now, and evil's gonna happen. I'll say we'll see him one more time in some sort of flashback, maybe when Loy's dying or something.
Yeah, I think one more time. I think we'll get one more substantial scene. I hope to God it's not in that cafe or that diner. I think we'll get one more scene. I'd like to see some resolution on the credit cards. I wouldn't be surprised if Satchel, aka Mike Milligan, kills Loy. Loy's gonna kill Rabbi Milligan, and then Mike's gonna be pissed about it, and then he's gonna kill his father.
Yeah, I think that's a great prediction. I definitely think Rabbi Milligan's gonna die, regardless. But it will be interesting to see how they come back into the story. 4 episodes left, 4 hours-ish of Fargo left to dissect, and it is definitely gonna be fascinating to see how all of these storylines come together. and these like characters who have been on the sidelines this whole time, like how they come back into the story for like one last final thing. And it will be interesting to see if all the characters do come together or not. But we'll be covering it every week because that's just what we'll do. And even if I have a trip to go on, I will upload it on the road. Because this is a true podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
We did it.
Yeah, there we go.